Mexico just reversed its border enforcement policy. Not quietly through diplomatic channels, not gradually over months of negotiation, not with careful coordination with Washington. The Mexican government announced immediate withdrawal of National Guard units from key border crossing points after 47 days of unprecedented cooperation that had reduced unauthorized crossings by 64%. Within 18 hours, processing centers in 19 American states reported capacity overflows as migration patterns shifted with stunning velocity. Warren Buffett called it the most predictable policy collapse he had witnessed in modern border relations. When you hear what happened in those closed-door meetings in Mexico City, why Mexican officials made calculations that prioritized domestic politics over bilateral commitments, and what transportation data reveals about the systematic preparation that preceded this reversal, you'll understand why this is not spontaneous policy change, but carefully orchestrated political theater with consequences extending far beyond immigration statistics. The architecture of cooperation that collapsed had taken 11 months to construct. Beginning in June of the previous year, senior officials from both nations had conducted 23 separate negotiating sessions addressing enforcement protocols, information sharing mechanisms, and resource allocation frameworks. The United States had committed $680 million in security assistance, including surveillance technology, transportation infrastructure, and training programs for Mexican enforcement personnel. In return, Mexico had agreed to deploy 8,400 National Guard troops to strategic positions along migration corridors, establish 17 new processing centers in southern states, and implement biometric tracking systems at 42 border crossing points. The results had exceeded projections from both governments. Department of Homeland Security data showed unauthorized border encounters declining from 187,000 in the baseline month to 67,000 in the final week of cooperation. Mexican Interior Ministry statistics documented 34,000 interdictions in the first 90-kilometer zone south of the border, preventing northward movement before individuals reached American territory. Smuggling organizations had responded by increasing per-person fees from an average of $8,200 to $1,400, effectively pricing out economic migrants while concentrating flows toward asylum seekers with greater financial resources or organizational backing. The system had created predictability that both governments valued. American immigration courts could process cases with greater efficiency when arrival numbers remained within manageable parameters. Mexican authorities gained intelligence on trafficking networks while demonstrating sovereignty through managed enforcement rather than appearing subordinate to American demands. European observers had characterized the arrangement as a potential model for migration partnerships between developed and developing nations facing similar demographic pressures. Three factors converged to destabilize this equilibrium. Mexican domestic politics entered a volatile phase as midterm elections approached, with opposition parties attacking the government for perceived subservience to American interests. Economic data showed Mexican border communities experiencing revenue declines as reduced migration flows diminished spending on transportation, housing, and services that had generated an estimated $340 million annually in economic activity. And critically, a series of incidents where Mexican enforcement actions resulted in civilian casualties, created public relations crises that opposition media exploited ruthlessly. The precipitating event occurred on a Tuesday morning at 9:47 a.m. local time in Tapachula, Chiapas. A National Guard unit conducting routine inspections at a migrant shelter encountered resistance from a group attempting to board northbound buses. Video footage captured by multiple witnesses showed escalating confrontation culminating in the discharge of firearms that left 2 Honduran nationals with serious injuries and a 19-year-old Guatemalan woman dead. Within 6 hours, protests erupted in Mexico City, Guadalajara, and Monterrey. Human rights organizations issued statements condemning militarized immigration enforcement. Opposition legislators demanded immediate hearings and threatened censure motions. President Claudia Sheinbaum faced calculations that transcended immigration policy. Her administration's approval ratings had declined 11 percentage points over 3 months, with polling data showing 58% of respondents viewing border cooperation as excessive accommodation to American demands. Coalition partners signaled that continued enforcement would jeopardize legislative support for economic initiatives the government considered essential. Media coverage framed the Tapachula incident not as isolated tragedy, but as inevitable consequence of policies prioritizing foreign relations over human rights. The decision emerged from emergency cabinet sessions conducted over 36 hours. According to people familiar with the deliberations, Foreign Minister Juan Ramón de la Fuente argued for maintaining cooperation while reforming enforcement protocols to prevent future incidents. Interior Minister Luisa María Alcalde countered that political sustainability required dramatic demonstration of policy independence. Defense officials warned that National Guard morale had deteriorated under mission parameters that generated domestic criticism without corresponding recognition. The economics team presented projections showing border communities could recover lost migration-related revenue through increased trade facilitation and tourism promotion. Sheinbaum's announcement came during a Thursday evening address broadcast on national television. She spoke for 23 minutes, characterizing the previous policy as temporary emergency measure that had achieved its stated objectives. Mexico had demonstrated capacity for effective border management, she stated, and would now transition to approach emphasizing humanitarian protection over enforcement. The National Guard would redeploy to positions focusing on organized crime rather than migration interdiction. Processing centers would shift from detention to assistance, providing resources for individuals to regularize status within Mexico rather than continuing northward. The language throughout avoided directly criticizing the United States while unmistakably signaling policy divergence. Sheinbaum emphasized Mexican sovereignty and constitutional obligations to protect human rights. She announced formation of special commission to investigate the Tapachula incident and recommend reforms ensuring accountability for enforcement personnel. The address concluded with statement that Mexican-American relations rested on mutual respect and shared prosperity rather than one nation subordinating its values to another's priorities. American officials learned of the decision through news coverage rather than diplomatic notification. The State Department received formal communication only after Sheinbaum's address had concluded, a sequencing that veteran diplomats characterized as deliberately insulting. Secretary of State Antony Blinken immediately requested secure call with Foreign Minister de la Fuente. That conversation, according to officials briefed on the exchange, remained cordial in tone while revealing complete absence of common ground on immediate response options. The operational impact began before the policy formally changed. Migration networks maintained sophisticated communication systems, and news of Mexico's announcement reached Central American communities within hours. Individuals who had delayed journeys due to enhanced enforcement began immediate preparations. Bus companies serving migration routes increased scheduling. Shelter operators in southern Mexico reported occupancy rates jumping from 34% to 89% in 72-hour period. The system responded with velocity that suggested extensive preparation rather than spontaneous reaction. American border facilities felt the shift with stunning rapidity. El Paso processing centers reported intake numbers increasing from 340 on Friday to 1,940 by Sunday evening. Tucson sector documented similar surge, with agents conducting 780 apprehensions compared to weekly average of 280. McAllen, Laredo, and San Diego all reported capacity pressures within the first weekend. By Monday morning, Customs and Border Protection had activated contingency protocols developed for emergency scenarios, transferring personnel from ports of entry to field operations and requesting support from other federal agencies. The geographic distribution revealed the policy's cascading effects. Migrants processed at southern border facilities enter transportation networks that distribute individuals to sponsor locations nationwide pending immigration proceedings. Within 5 days, reception centers in 19 states reported arrivals exceeding their 30-day averages. New York City officials announced emergency measures to accommodate 340 additional individuals beyond shelter system capacity. Chicago declared similar emergency with 280 arrivals. Denver, Atlanta, Philadelphia, and Houston all reported sudden demand spikes requiring urgent resource reallocation. State governors responded along predictable partisan lines, but the crisis created unusual political dynamics. Democratic governors in states with substantial migrant populations face constituent pressure from progressive activists demanding expanded services and conservative taxpayers resisting additional expenditures. Republican governors seized opportunities to attack Biden administration border policies while privately acknowledging that sudden surges created genuine humanitarian challenges requiring federal assistance regardless of political messaging. The economic impacts manifested across multiple sectors. Border cities experienced immediate revenue increases from migration-related spending on food, transportation, communication services, and lodging. McAllen Business Groups estimated $3 million in additional economic activity during the first 10 days. But those gains concentrated in specific commercial categories while creating costs for municipal services. Emergency medical treatment for migrants without insurance generated $670,000 in unreimbursed expenses for El Paso hospitals in the first week alone. Law enforcement overtime costs added $340,000 to county budgets in Tucson area. Transportation companies found themselves navigating complex market conditions. Bus operators serving routes from border cities to major metropolitan areas saw demand increase 340%, allowing fare increases averaging 28% while maintaining full capacity. Airlines offering low-cost service to cities with large migrant communities reported load factors exceeding 90% on routes typically operating at 70-75% capacity. The sudden travel demand generated approximately $89 million in incremental revenue for transportation sector in the first 2 weeks. Labor markets experienced regional variations in response to increased migration flows. Agricultural employers in California and Florida reported improved access to workers during peak harvest periods, with wage growth moderating from 8% annually to 5% as labor supply expanded. Construction companies in Texas and Arizona similarly noted easier recruitment, but service sector employers in cities receiving migrants faced different pressures as individuals authorized to work pending immigration proceedings competed for entry-level positions in markets where unemployment already exceeded national averages. Federal budget implications emerged as congressional committees demanded cost projections. Immigration and Customs Enforcement estimated need for $780 million in supplemental appropriations to handle increased detention, transportation, and processing requirements. Health and Human Services projected $560 million for unaccompanied minor services. Justice Department immigration courts requested $240 million to address case backlogs that would grow by estimated 89,000 cases. Combined federal, state, and local costs for the first 90 days reached approximately $2. $1 billion according to preliminary Government Accountability Office analysis. International reactions revealed the global implications of seemingly bilateral policy change. Central American governments welcome Mexico's shift as reducing pressure on their own populations while acknowledging its complicated efforts to address root causes of migration through economic development. European Union officials observed the situation nervously, recognizing parallels to their own challenges, coordinating migration policy across nations with divergent interests. The United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees issued carefully worded statement supporting humanitarian protection while avoiding criticism of any specific government. Public opinion polling in the United States showed Americans deeply divided along familiar lines. Surveys conducted in the immediate aftermath found 67% of Democrats viewing Mexico's decision as appropriate assertion of sovereignty, while 71% of Republicans characterized it as betrayal of cooperative commitments. Independent voters split almost evenly, but more detailed questioning revealed complexity beneath partisan responses. Majorities across all political affiliations supported both strong border enforcement and humane treatment of asylum seekers, with disagreement focusing on which priority should prevail when they conflicted. The media coverage demonstrated stark polarization in information ecosystems. Conservative outlets emphasized security implications and portrayed Mexico as an untrustworthy partner that abandoned commitments under political pressure. Progressive media highlighted human rights concerns and criticized previous enforcement approach as excessively harsh. Mainstream news organizations attempted balanced coverage while struggling to convey policy complexities in formats demanding simple narratives. Spanish-language media provided most nuanced analysis, exploring Mexican domestic political dynamics that Anglo outlets largely ignored. Warren Buffett's response to the crisis addressed fundamental questions about partnership sustainability when nations face competing domestic and international pressures. In remarks at Berkshire Hathaway's annual meeting, Buffett reflected on 60 years of observing international business relationships, and he said that enduring partnerships require alignment of incentives, not just shared rhetoric. When one party gains politically by abandoning cooperation, while the other absorbs all costs of dissolution, the arrangement contains inherent instability. He drew parallels to corporate joint ventures, where success depends on both parties benefiting from continued collaboration, not one partner sacrificing domestic interests for relationship maintenance. Buffett applied these principles to the Mexico border situation with characteristic directness. The previous enforcement cooperation, he explained, had worked technically, but failed politically because benefits and costs distributed asymmetrically. The United States gained reduced border crossings and improved processing efficiency. Mexico absorbed financial costs, domestic political criticism, and international human rights scrutiny. When crisis emerged, Mexican officials made rational calculation that cooperation's political costs exceeded its benefits. The Tapachula incident simply provided justification for a decision that underlying incentive structure made inevitable. He emphasized that sustainable immigration partnership requires Mexico gaining concrete benefits that domestic constituencies recognize and value. Trade facilitation reducing border crossing times for commercial vehicles would benefit Mexican exporters. Infrastructure investment in southern states would create employment while improving quality of life. Technology sharing that enhanced Mexico's capacity to combat trafficking organizations would address genuine security priority. These tangible gains would create political coalition supporting cooperation rather than arrangement sustained only by presidential commitment, vulnerable to first serious controversy. Buffett noted parallel to business negotiations, where he had learned that the best agreements make both parties slightly uncomfortable, but clearly better off than alternatives. Border cooperation making Mexico responsible for enforcement without corresponding benefits placed entire burden on one side. Revised approach should accept that the United States must contribute resources and accept responsibilities in exchange for Mexican cooperation. Treating partnership as favor Mexico grants rather than mutual benefit both nations gain guarantees eventual collapse. His closing observation addressed Americans frustrated by Mexico's decision. Countries act in their perceived self-interest, just as individuals and businesses do. Expecting Mexico to absorb domestic political costs for American benefit without reciprocal advantages is like expecting a business partner to accept losses for your profit. It might work temporarily if the relationship holds other value, but it will not endure. The question is not why Mexico reversed course, but why anyone believed the previous arrangement could survive first serious test. Smart policy anticipates partner incentives and structures agreements where cooperation serves both parties' domestic interests, not just one nation's priorities. So here is where we stand. Mexico reversed 11 months of border enforcement cooperation following domestic political crisis that exposed unsustainable incentive structure. The shift generated immediate migration surge affecting 19 American states, with 67,000 additional arrivals in the first 2 weeks, and projected costs exceeding $1 billion over 90 days. Warren Buffett explained that partnerships fail when benefits and burdens distribute asymmetrically, and sustainable cooperation requires both parties gaining politically from continuation. Can the United States and Mexico construct a revised approach where Mexican officials gain domestic political credit for cooperation rather than absorbing criticism? Can American policymakers accept that effective border management requires investing in Mexican capacity and addressing Mexican priorities, not just demanding enforcement? And the question that extends beyond immigration policy to every international partnership in an era of resurgent nationalism: how do nations build cooperation that survives domestic political pressures when voters in every democracy increasingly demand that their governments prioritize national interests over international commitments? Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.